Hello and welcome to another episode of the No and Never podcast. This is episode 2 of Vincent Kompany leaves Burnley. It's now been announced. He has left his position at Turf Moor and joined German outfit Bayern Munich in a 3-year deal, leaving Burnley without a manager. And the news that's been the worst kept secret in football has now been confirmed. We've had a statement from the club. We've had Bayern words from Kompany, nothing yet addressed to us. And we've had all sorts of managerial shakers, movers, rumours. Who knows what's going to happen next? I've got the team together this week. I'm joined by George, Tom and Rich. We're going to look at that announcement and we're going to weigh up what managers are in the frame for the next Burnley job. So listeners, let's go. Gentlemen, part 2 of our Vincent Kompany special. He has now left Turf Moor, joined Bayern Munich on a 3-year deal, reportedly paid Burnley £10.2 million for compensation to lure him away from Turf Moor. I'm going to resist the urge to say that he couldn't run away fast enough, but we'll come on to that shortly. Until today's announcement of recording today, we weren't 100% sure which of his backroom staff were going with him, whether it was just him or whether he would be taking everybody with him. But Bayern have finally got their 8th choice manager, bringing a ridiculous saga to an end. We're not even a minute into the podcast and I'm coming out with the digs. I think we're going to know where this episode is going. Let's start with you, George, because we don't get you on very often. And it's very nice to have you on here because you often skive and disappear for times on end. You're back to work and back on the podcast. The announcement's obviously been made. I guess where I'm going to go with this is first, what's your overall feeling with this? Do you feel angry? Are you not bothered? Do you feel betrayed? And how do you think it's been perceived across the board?
Yeah, I think my thoughts will probably echo Tom and Rich here in that I'm on one half happy that he's gone really and glad to see the back of him. But on the other half, you look at the managerial candidates that we'll discuss in the second half of this podcast and you think slim pickings. Now, Vincent Kompany failed completely last year in the Premier League with us. And as we've discussed before, and as Rich put the point very well in last week's podcast, is that he prioritised himself and brand company for me over what was best for Burnley last season. And because of that, I don't think there is much regret at seeing him leave. I was never one to say Kompany should have been sacked, whereas fair play, Tom was very much on that from November.
I was as well from January, I've got to say.
Yeah. I wanted him to stay just because, and I think I've put in our group chat since, the only regret at seeing Kompany go is that I felt with him and with his stature in the game and his notoriety, there was a potential for this so-called, exponential growth. If we stayed up in the Premier League and consolidated, which is a big if, we could have gone towards, the top 10 of that league with the pulling power we had with players, with the style of football, which for a lot of good football players, that style is attractive to join that club. And you thought, well, if we can replicate what we've done in the Championship, but obviously to a lower level in the Premier League, less wins and whatnot, but there was that potential to reach the top 10. And I think we've seen Kompany go, you find that, okay, 5-year project has sort of disintegrated and now we're back to where we were, which is, can we get back up to the Premier League and then maybe suffer and struggle to stay up? So that excitement for the long-term future possibly goes with Kompany for me a little bit on that point. But yeah, no real regrets at seeing him leave because we all know our issues with him and he clearly is happy to see the back of us. So we'll see the back of him. Thank you.
Tom?
It's kind of interesting. I actually feel the opposite almost. I mean, first and foremost, let's say, I don't blame him for going. I'm not particularly angry that he's gone.
None of us do. Yeah, none of us do.
Yeah, you can't turn that job down, so fair enough. Actually, I feel more. George is saying it's like the long term is a bit less kind of enthusiastic now. I actually feel the opposite. I think if we'd have kept Kompany, we'd have had more chance of going up this season than we do now. I think there's a lot more uncertainty. That's not to say we won't or we can't, but it feels less certain to me than it did when he was still here. But if we'd have gone back up, I would not have been confident at all about becoming a top 10 team with him because he was just so bad last year. I don't see I didn't see much evidence of him learning lessons. I think if we'd have gone back up with him, we'd have been back to square one again as we are this summer. So I actually think it's an opportunity to get someone who will do a better job for us in the Premier League than he did. So I'm actually a bit more optimistic if we can get back up. But it's the short-term thing for me. It's, are we going to get back up now in the next couple of years like we need to? But if we do, then I think I'd rather
more positive going forward.
Some of these other managers than Kompany in the Premier League for sure.
I think that's a really good point. And I think if we go back to some of our podcasts when we were feeling really disheartened at points this season, the point that we made was that Vincent Kompany was clearly not the man to bring long-term sustainable top flight football to Burnley. So if that's the case, then why are we keeping him? And I get the arguments. And actually, that's then when we become selfish as a club. Vincent Kompany's been selfish in his career, as he's entitled to do. But we then become selfish and go, well, actually, now we've left it too late to part company with you in the Premier League. We are going to use you in the Championship and be selfish because we think you're the best chance of getting us out of that. But you're right. I was already not looking forward to going back up with him. You know, I was looking forward to the Championship. But yeah, I think they're really good points. Rich, you and I talked this a little bit last week in part one, but it's a strange choice all round for me. And the consistent message coming out from most media outlets is one of almost head scratching, going like, where has this come from? How on earth has he landed on his feet and got this job? We know he wasn't the first choice. Vincent Kompany knows he wasn't the first choice. He was the 8th choice. It's been a long, protracted process for Bayern. The fans are getting very jaded, and a lot of managers, really key managers, particularly Alonso, I think was the one they were going for, have turned them down. He's not experienced in that country. He's not experienced in the Bundesliga. He's never played in a Champions League football in his life. And if you listen to reports coming out of the German media, they're very clear that you have to win the Bundesliga if you're going to keep your job. So this is potentially a very short-term appointment for Kompany, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd have thought Kompany would have played Champions League football with Man City.
No, not Trevor. I'm such an idiot.
Managed, you mean?
Managed, yes.
Yeah.
I wondered why you were looking at me funny. I was like, what have I said? I've said something stupid, obviously.
Yeah, I know City's relative terms success is, maybe not long term, but I'm pretty sure
he's not managed in the Champions League.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm an idiot. I'm sorry. It's been a long day.
I can't believe he's gone to Bayern Munich.
From his perspective, you think he should have said no? To be clear.
No, absolutely not. You can't say no to an opportunity like that. I think going back to what George said initially about brand Kompany, I said a long time ago on the podcast that the reason he's still playing this way is because his style of football will be attractive to other clubs. A few people couldn't quite understand what I was saying at that point, and people like, yeah, but he's rubbish. No one's going to want to take him when he's done so bad with Burnley. But I'd seen very early on what he was doing. I twigged it quite early, and but at the same time, for Bayern Munich to come in, it is a big shock. Yeah, obviously they've had managers turn them down, but I am surprised they've gone for Kompany. I am surprised they've gone for him.
But when you say you shouldn't have gone him, do you mean from Bayern's perspective they shouldn't have gone?
Yeah. I mean from Bayern's perspective, I found it really interesting. One of the directors said that he did a good job at Anderlecht. He did a great job in the Championship managing Burnley. Seemed to forget the part of Burnley only getting 23, 24 points, whatever it is. He conveniently missed that section of his interview out. But I think he could do well there, though. I think it's proven with his style of football, with better players, you have got more chance of succeeding. I'm not annoyed with him leaving for Bayern Munich. I'm annoyed with how shit he was last year.
Yeah, I'm annoyed. I'm not annoyed at him for going.
That's what I'm annoyed at.
Yeah, so I'm annoyed that we allowed this to happen. That's what I'm annoyed at. I'm annoyed that we left ourselves vulnerable to him just walking out the door when he wanted to.
What I think, and I think Tom mentioned it in our group chat, they seemed like so confident that he was going to stay, which I felt was incredibly naive, because I didn't expect Bayern Munich to come in, but I thought a Brighton might come in. A Brentford, possibly Thomas Frank goes, maybe, a club who's kind of like mid-table Bundesliga, mid-table La Liga, maybe like a Roma, someone like that in Serie A might come in for him. But I never would have expected Bayern Munich. So, and I think the board, and Alan Pace is going to learn a lot of lessons from this, and I hope that he becomes less naive, and I hope he conducts himself a little bit more professionally as a result of this, and doesn't start getting into silly Twitter debates with journalists. But he'll be hurt by this, Alan Pace. He'll be hurt by it,
both
personally and professionally, and he'll feel let down, because I think, whether it was naive or not, I do genuinely believe the Burnley board felt that Kompany was in it for this project, which is not something I fully bought into. And where I stand with Kompany is that first season was amazing. Let's not forget that. You know, we won the league at Ewood Park. We played some amazing football. It was the first time that I've really gone to Burnley games, just like not expecting us to win, knowing we was going to win. You knew we was going to just beat teams last season. But at the same time, it's hard for me to fully embrace what he did in that first season after what a shambles of last season was. And I think some of his quotes regarding Burnley in his interview left a sour taste in the mouth about small club. I get that, but how he didn't get money to spend, and I thought that was quite insulting. And if I was the previous board who give him a good amount of money in Burnley terms to spend, I would feel a little bit insulted by that comment. But listen, good luck to him. You got to say good luck to him. But I would like Dortmund and Matson to win the league next year again.
I'd love it. This is an awful thing to say, and I'm ashamed that I have this thought process, because I like to conduct myself as a nice human being. I like to be kind. I don't like to be cruel. But the irrational and very emotional football fan takes over every now and again. And if he does absolutely fall and he's out of a job by Christmas, I probably will chuckle a little bit. And believe me, listeners, I'm ashamed that I think that way, but it's going to happen. George, speaking of Kompany, before we move on to our managers, and this idea that we think he might be okay, and he's gone to a big club with these big players, and he's going to be able to have to manage in the Champions League. You shared in our group a couple of days ago an interesting article that you'd seen in The Athletic about some suggestions that, from a man-manager perspective and from a dressing room leader, not necessarily a good egg, our Vincent. And there were some concerns here that he's alienated players, he's not delivered messages properly. Just summarise what that article meant and what your view of that was.
Yeah, I thought it was a really good piece by Andy Jones, who obviously covers Burnley.
Yeah, it's great, Andy.
And I presume it was one of their German correspondents who sort of co-wrote it. And I don't want to put it into my own words. I'll just read a couple of extracts from it, which I found
good idea.
Particularly interesting. It talks about Kompany. Essentially, you know, he set up this leadership group when he first arrived at Burnley, and as we all know, the Championship season was an absolute incredible success, and it all worked very well. But things have gone wrong this season, and the Athletic piece wrote that Kompany is not the most personable man manager, and whilst his media tendency is to protect his players from criticism, privately he's not known for explaining selection decisions or taking time to tell individual players why they are not in the team. It is indicative of his clinical approach in general. He gives short shrift to players' complaints or to those who mourn or sulk. In a sense, he's egalitarian. He wants players to prove why they deserve to be playing, and that places emphasis on training, etc. It concluded by saying that there'd been no communication with his players over his intentions with Bayern, and our squad were on holiday when they found out the news. Obviously, as we all know, many players had signed for Burnley because of Vincent Kompany and his pulling power. So I have a feeling a few of them will be left in the lurch now. On the first point that they raised in that Athletic piece, which I found interesting, was about him not letting players know why they're not being selected. And I was watching one of the Overlap episodes the other week. I think it was with the one with Andy Cole, formerly of Burnley, of course, and Gary Neville, and how they always like to talk about Sir Alex Ferguson. Obviously, we all know the Overlap goes on about that manager quite a lot. But it was interesting because Gary said Ferguson always, to a fault, explained to a player, if they're in the team first week and not in the team the second week, they'd always sit down and let them know why. Now, if they're out of the team for a prolonged period, then that conversation wouldn't take place. But if you're being dropped, he'd always explain why. And by the sounds of it, between him and Andy Cole, that's the way with most managers. So if the Athletic's right and they're saying he doesn't do this, it would stand him out from the crowd, and perhaps it's indicative of where things have gone wrong with the squad morale this season. Who knows how strong the reports are, but Andy did report a few weeks ago that the players had gone out for a meal in January, a few of the older players, but there was only 9 or 10 of them turned up, to this squad meal. And it just hinted at fractures within the group that possibly we've not realised from the outside. And the thing that's
I think
more
we could have
indicative
guessed that this season.
The thing for me that's more indicative of Kompany's character is something that Rich mentioned, is his comments today to Bayern, and more to my point, his lack of comments to Burnley. There's been absolutely nothing from Kompany since he left officially yesterday on any of the Burnley's social media channels, YouTube channels. I just think it's a disgrace that there's no exit interview. And I was sort of giving them time, and possibly it might still come, but the fact that they've announced Bellamy and Jackson as this acting head coach and acting assistant makes me think that exit interview or exit comments aren't coming, because they've drawn a line now. This is our acting head coach going forward. It would feel odd if they brought anything out from Kompany now. And for the fact that he's not done an exit interview after signing a 5-year deal, after we've backed him all season, giving us one of the worst top flight seasons in Burnley's history, I think it's an absolute disgrace. Whether you'd like to hear from him or not, we should have heard from him.
Rich?
I think just picking up on what George said about the dressing room riffs, this and I agree with Tommy in some to a certain extent, obviously, because Kompany did well in the Championship last time. But my worry was about him coming back into pre-season was that there's going to be a lot of unhappy players.
Yeah, you've said that a few times.
And yes, they might be looking to ship those players out the door, but getting players out the door is easier than it. Even the top clubs at times find it hard to get players out the door. And I was worried that if Kompany come back, that there's going to be some toxicity in that dressing room. And I think for me, it's been clear to see his man management wasn't great. And like I said, when you're winning week in, week out, team morale and team spirit's going to stay good anyway. And to me, it's like, not playing Muric, the way he's treated Benson, the way Zaruri got treated, it would have left a bad taste and a sour taste in the dressing room. And I'm not saying it's a coincidence, but Jay signing a new contract when it looked certain like he was going to leave. To me, I don't think Jay would have signed that contract if Kompany was still here. And I think it's not been a great spell for Burnley, but I think it's really good that Jay's staying on. He's not going to be a starter every week, but you need, especially like losing Gudmundsson and losing Cork. Hopefully Taylor signs on for me. You need leaders in that dressing room to move Burnley into what the new era will be.
Yeah, definitely. Tom, picking up on what George said then, we have had an announcement today that Bellamy and Jackson have stepped up to take temporary charge of the Clarets as an acting head coach and an acting assistant. We were a little confused when this news came out. We were chatting about this offline before we came to record. Couldn't understand whether it was needed. The players were on holiday. If you look at social media, most of them are off to get married. They're not going to be around here. There's probably not going to be much done in terms of player transfers in the early stages. So I guess what do we read anything into that? What do we think of this? And actually, what do we think of the appointment anyway?
I didn't put that much stock in it, to be honest. I think it's just, I think you have to have a caretaker manager, even if there's no games. There's obviously always things happening behind the scenes. I think you'll hear any football manager say when they get the summer break, they take the phone with them and the phone's constantly ringing.
Yeah.
There's things like, I know obviously we haven't got a manager yet, but there's a certain amount of independence that clubs have from the manager now when it comes to transfers. I think obviously Rodriguez signing a new contract, that's not been agreed presumably with any incoming manager. So things like that, you need someone in place, and they're the obvious choices, being as they're probably pretty much the only coaches who aren't going to Germany with Kompany from what I've seen. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily suggesting that Bellamy's got a great chance of getting the job next or anything like that. I think it's just,
I don't think that's right.
You have to have a stopgap, and they make sense to be the stopgaps.
Do we think though that it's probably a good sign that they will stay in the club though in some capacity. Certainly, Mike Jackson, he's got to be looking after the under-21 still. So, do we think this is a sign that they will be? Because I think for me, it says one of three things. I wonder whether they're settled. They both seem to be settled in the UK. Do they want to uproot their families and go and move to Germany? Possibly not. You know, Bellamy's followed Kompany to Anderlecht. Maybe he's ready to settle back in the UK. I think Bellamy, more than Mike Jackson's, got some designs to step up to be a number one at some point after he's been learning his trade as a number two. Maybe, and again, well, it's been a good 21 minutes before I had a dig, but maybe they're sensible enough to realise that might be a very short spell in Germany. They'll be out of a job very quickly, and they're seeking more stability and not having to move their families to Germany and then come home again by Christmas when it all goes horribly wrong. But yeah, I guess my perspective, surely it just means that they're going to be around the club and stay here and be part of the new coaching setup, whatever that looks like, Tom.
I think probably that's right for Jackson. Obviously, he was retained by Kompany. I think it always helps when you have a new management team to have a little bit of continuity there. Someone who knows the players, that kind of thing. But I think you're probably right about Bellamy. I think probably, from what I've heard, just rumours and things, but it sounded like he was going to leave anyway, even if Kompany had stayed. And I get the impression that he wants to be a number one.
Yeah.
So to me, I think if we get a new manager and it's not Craig Bellamy, then I can't see Bellamy staying. I can't see him wanting to be assistant to somebody else. But I think you're right about Jackson as well. I think it's likely that he's going to stay and provide a bit of continuity. And I'm quite surprised. I don't know if he got the option to go to Bayern Munich. I think it would have been a little bit incongruous to see Mike Jackson as a coach at Bayern Munich, but equally, if he had turned that down.
Awesome. That would have been one of the very few things I'd have liked about this. I'd have just been like, Mike Jackson's coaching the Champions League, not playing. I'd have loved it. No, it's interesting. Okay, enough of that clown. He's gone. We're closing. We are now closing the chapter on Vincent Kompany. What happens next? Well, part 2 of this podcast, we are going to look at who Burnley's next manager is going to be. Plenty of names being talked about. We've already mentioned this at some point earlier on today in this podcast, that the managerial pool's quite low at the moment, which is possibly why Craig Bellamy is looking to take this opportunity to step up to number one, because there's plenty of jobs available. There have been betting odds, there have been fan discussions, there's been newspaper reports of who's going to be next. I'm going to start with 2 that have emerged today as front runners. Apparently, we're down to a shortlist of 2. And listeners, it's a horrifying shortlist by all accounts. I'm going to start with you, Rich, because I feel like we could do with a Rich rant. This would be a really good one. If rumours are to be believed, the 2 managers on the immediate shortlist are ex-Fulham and Bournemouth manager Scott Parker and unmitigated disaster in the Chelsea outfit Frank Lampard, but did okay at Derby. They are not inspiring appointments, are they, Rich?
No, it's like choosing which one you'd rather see in bed with your missus, isn't it, really? Out of them 2. But no, in all seriousness, I would be. Listen, we're judging off what Alan Nixon says.
Yes.
Aren't we, by saying it's those 2 in the running? It's a funny one, isn't it, Alan Nixon? Because some stuff he gets right, some stuff he doesn't. I suppose that's a journalist's life. I find it very hard to believe that they'll just be those 2 in the contention. Right. And I'm not dismissing that those 2 aren't a candidate. It's like, we're Burnley fans, aren't we? At the end of the day, we're not a fan of any particular manager, and if one of them 2 was to take the job, I wouldn't be particularly pleased with it. But you've got to back the manager, and ultimately, we're still going to have a very good squad for the Championship next year. And a lot of the time, a manager's only as good as the players, and you get very special managers who tend to excel with the lesser players we had. And obviously, we had one of them, didn't we? Who's doing the same at Everton now. So, there's I think, was it you said there, Natalie? There's not a massive pool, is there? I think I forgot to mention it on the last podcast, and then Tom messaged into our group because I just forgot his name. Cooper was my number 1 choice, and then he's obviously turned us down. I mentioned Moyes, but it doesn't seem like he's willing to drop down at this stage. So where I'm at the moment is I'm like, I don't really have a number one because the pool's not massive. It wouldn't surprise me if Pace went and looked into Europe still, which is obviously a risk because he don't know the Championship. But I still think Burnley will be a very appealing job to a lot of managers out there. If you ask me to pick out of Parker and Lampard, I'd probably just edge Parker because, like him a lump, and he still got promoted twice with two different teams. Even though the teams you would fancy to go up, he still did the job with them. But yeah,
he succeeded when he was supposed to exceed.
And I mentioned on the last podcast that I want a manager I don't want to go back to hoofball, but I want a manager who represents what the town is about, and that's hard work, a bit of grit, feeling like, you can win with your backs against the wall. And I just look at Parker and Lampard, and they're not Burnley managers to me. Even discarding what they've done in past jobs, they're not Burnley managers. And I think, obviously, Pace loves a name. He wants Burnley to be a brand. And ultimately, especially Lampard, if Lampard does carry on, it keeps the PR train going.
Yeah.
So
would rather not.
I think them putting out that statement, I don't think it was necessarily needed, but I understand why they've done it. And I think George said in our group, there's no downside to them doing it, which I do agree with. I don't think they're going to rush disappointment. I think that's what it tells me. There's no need to rush it. We're not even. We're only just entering June. The players won't come back for pre-season until July, so there's no rush for me. Let's take our time. Let's get the right appointment, because I think this next appointment is absolutely crucial. It is really, really important to us.
Yeah, it is. One of the names, a couple of the names that Rich mentioned there, we're going to go through this list as well, Tom. Steve Cooper emerged as one of the early favourites. Obviously very successful with Forest, but hasn't been in work since he left that Forest role. The fact he has turned us down because he is speaking to Premier League clubs. We're going to put David Moyes in the same bracket of this, because a lot of us are in dreamland and I would love it, and I know not everybody would, but he would be a fantastic signing in my view. We suspect he's going to take a break and probably wait for the December round of sackings in the Premier League. So bearing in mind that those two strong candidates are waiting for Premier League games, that puts us in a difficult place in terms of what pool we're trying to select managers from, because the Premier League are coming to the Championship to look for their managers.
I suppose the first thing I'd say about Cooper is, I know that there's reports that he's holding out for a Premier League job, but I wouldn't necessarily take that as gospel. There's only two, I think, at the minute in the Premier League. You've got Brighton and Leicester when Maresca goes to Chelsea. Obviously, you've got the Forest Leicester thing. Would he be the kind of manager Brighton would want? Does he play that kind of football? Don't think so. I don't think it's guaranteed that he'll go to either of those, and then maybe he will do the Moyes. I think you're right about Moyes. I think he'll probably wait until sacking season and get a rescue job. Maybe he'll do that, but I wouldn't say that's definite for Cooper. So I wouldn't completely rule him out. I think he would be my preference. We obviously saw, again, not to go back to your Bayern Munich digs, but we obviously saw a massive club like that having to end up with their 11th choice manager because they couldn't get anyone to take it. Which just suggests, like you say, that it's a manager's market at the minute. They can kind of pick and choose and wait for the jobs. But there are still some big managers out there. You've got Pochettino, Tuchel, people like this out of work. So you think they kind of be the Premier League.
Surely Poch is going to go to United finally after about 5 years in the waiting.
Yeah, maybe so.
Surely.
Although then that FA Cup, because there was all the noise that Ten Hag was going to go after the FA Cup, and then suddenly he's won the cup against City, and that seems to have cooled a little bit. So difficult to say. I think, like you said about Cooper, he's been out of work for a while now, and I think it is a bit of a risk to leave it a long time. You could end up doing an Alan Kirbishley, wait for a job, and then suddenly don't get offered any. And I think our job is pretty appealing if you're that kind of level of manager as well. So it's a really good opportunity to get a promotion on your CV. I think looking at the clubs that we're up against next year, the other two teams that will come down, Sheffield United are a bit of a basket case, and Luton haven't got a lot of money, so you wouldn't necessarily think they'll be a financial powerhouse in the league next season. Leeds are going to be tough. I think West Brom will be tough. Norwich are a bit of an unknown with a new manager, but you'd expect we've got a good chance of coming in at least top 6 and probably top 2. So I think we're appealing. I think if you're a manager like Steve Cooper, for example, Leicester's a tough job next year. They're going to get a point of deduction. There's a lot of uncertainty around them. Maybe it's a better option just to come down with those, back yourself to get another promotion on your CV, and then does that make you an attractive manager? And I think that's going to be the case for someone like Lampard as well. You might think he'd be someone, having the last couple of jobs he's done have been Premier League, maybe someone who wants to stay in the Premier League. But I think for the fact that his last few jobs haven't gone well, that makes us more of an appealing option, because I think it's a good chance to, like I say, to get a promotion on your CV, and then kind of you've got that achievement then on your CV tick. It's something that perhaps changes the way you looked at. So yeah, I think I don't think we should be too worried about the way the market is at the minute. I think we should kind of big ourselves up. I think we're an attractive proposition, and I think that if managers are turning a job like ours down for a Premier League one. Another point on that, actually, not a lot of sackings in the Premier League last season.
No, that's true.
Yeah, the 3 relegated teams, only one made a change. Obviously, Forest, they're a club that sack the managers a lot, but even they, have only had 2 managers the 2 seasons they've been in the Premier League. And there's a lot of FFP talk that clubs are a bit more reluctant to sack. So I do think if you're a Moyes, you're going to get a Premier League job. If you're a Cooper, it's not a guarantee. So I perhaps personally wouldn't shut the door on that one. I would like us to make a big push for him, but obviously I'm not privy to what's going on behind the scenes. So I wouldn't rule it out, but yeah, we'll see.
You don't have. I always thought that you had a hotline in your room to call up the club, call up Pacey Goy. This is Tom Whittaker calling. Come on.
He disconnected it after the 50th time I rang him.
in one day, right? Yeah. George, let's move to you. Let's just move into the Championship then, because there are 3 names emerging on the list being talked about who are relatively current Championship managers. Liam Rossinoir, is that right? Rossinoir. So, come on, help me out. Liam
Rosenior, like
thank
you.
The
opposite of Virginia.
Right, Rosenior. Liam Rosenior, just been dispatched by Hull. Mark Robbins, Coventry manager, and Michael Carrick, the Borough manager. That's a slightly underwhelming one. 3 current Championship managers, albeit obviously Rosenior has recently gone. Any of those inspire you, George?
Yeah, I think you've been a bit harsh to Michael Carrick there, and probably too favourable to.
Is he a safe pair of hands, do you think?
Sorry, you haven't been too favourable. Other people have been too favourable to Carlos Corberán, I think, at West Brom, who's another Championship.
Yes, of course.
That's the mix there that a few people, fancy, and I think he's somewhere in the betting odds. To me, Corberán, maybe Tom and Rich might disagree here, but he's a manager that gets a very good reputation, but for doing very little. He's not taken a team up from the Championship, and he's been there, a couple of times between Huddersfield and West Brom now. So to me, Corberán's not like the most inspiring, but at the same time, he's done an okay job. Whereas for me, Liam Rosenior isn't the answer. He took a very, very good Hull side and finished outside of the playoffs last season. Now they improved as a team, but I just think for me, with the players that they had, especially after their January window, where not only did they get Anas Sarori, but they got a couple of other good signings as well.
Yeah,
they should have kicked on and finished in the playoffs. So for me, another underwhelming one in there. But these managers are possibly going to be that. Sean Dyche wasn't the most exciting manager when we appointed him. He'd been sacked by Watford, hadn't had anything prior to that. So maybe one of them turns out to be a belter and the right fit. But yeah, for me, Michael Carrick, of the names you mentioned, was the most exciting. He did fantastically well in his first season with Middlesbrough, and they've struggled this past season because they sold a lot of their players, a lot of their good players, and turned a good profit on those players. So that's the kind of manager that we want, is a manager who can improve players like, you know, your Cameron Archers, your Aaron Ramseys, who obviously was on loan, and turn a profit on these players. So for me, Michael Carrick's a very good option, plays good mixed football, and he really steadied the ship this season after a poor start for Middlesbrough. They got back on track, and I think if he stays and they give him a bit of backing this summer, they could be a candidate for the playoffs next season. So for me, of the fellas you listed, Michael Carrick's the man, and Mark Robins to me is just not too exciting. But again, I think maybe a Rich or a Tom might disagree on that one.
I actually like Robins.
Yeah, I do.
There's something about him that I like. I think he's a little bit of I swore before, so I don't want to swear again. He's a little bit of an S house.
Swearing.
Sorry. He is a little bit of an S house, and I think I mentioned before about I want us to go back to being a little bit of that at Burnley's teams. You know, we beat Coventry twice, 1-0 in our promotion season, but they were horrible. They were really, really tough games. You know, they got beaten in a playoff final by Luton on penalties. You're talking about Middlesbrough selling players. None come to mind unless I'm wrong. Of who Middlesbrough sold, but Coventry sold Gyökeres and Hamer. Her was missing for a large part of the season, and again, they only just finished outside of the playoffs. So to me, the names you mentioned there, I wouldn't mind Robins at all. And you know, he does play decent football. You know, you look at the game they had against Man United and the spirit they've got in that club and that team, and where they've took them from. I forgot about him, but yeah, I quite like him as a candidate, to be honest. And he's not soft, and that's what I want in a manager. I want someone who's not just gonna roll over, you know, and get us back to being hard to play against.
So is he going to be your first choice?
I don't know. I wouldn't say anyone's my first choice at the moment, because no one massively stands out. But out of those names you mentioned, he would be my number one on that particular list of current Championship managers. Yeah.
Tom, can you give me a name who's going to be on top of your list from who we've talked about?
It's Cooper for me, assuming that's still realistic. Of the others we've mentioned, no one really gets me excited, if I'm honest.
George, one for you.
Well, I was just going to say to Rich's point, I think maybe I'm probably being a bit elitist and snobbery with Robins. I do think, you know, we've been sold this dream of us moving forward as this very progressive and a club, and you know, maybe a Robins, he's actually a very good appointment. And I just had that Middlesbrough lost Akpom and Morgan Rogers, and then obviously Aaron Ramsey left, who'd been on loan. So for me, Carrick's a very good option out of those Championship.
Are you picking him? Are you having him as your number one?
No, I'm not being backed into a corner. I'm going to sit on my fence.
Fine, I'm sticking Carrick for you then. My number one choice is probably Robins as well. I'm going to go with that. Listeners, that's all we've got time for this week. It's going to wrap that up there. This has been part 2 of our company special. We're going to draw a line under this now. We're going to be back in the next couple of weeks with Heat or Sell. We're going to go through our current squad list and decide who we're going to be getting rid of and who we are happy to stay in the club. So keep an eye on social media. We'll let you know when that comes in. I've been Natalie Bromley. This has been the No Nay Never podcast. Until next time. The No Nay Never podcast is brought to you in association with the talkSPORT Fan Network. Our host and editor is Natalie Bromley, and the show is produced by Matt Moss. Our resident statistician is Dave Roberts, and our FPL expert is Adam Dennett. The Analysis Show team is collectively Tom Whittaker, Rich Steele, George Poole, Charlotte Rigby, and Adam Dennett. Our music is provided by George Gaskell, and our newsletter team is headed up by Jamie Smith. If you don't already, you can subscribe to our newsletter by visiting nonaynever.substack.com. Thanks as ever go to our partners talkSPORT. We are proud to be associated with the talkSPORT Fan Network.